obviously they feel something and they see something. I would say that it doesn't need proving. It's evident to anyone who's living in our time that the American empire is in decline. And it's going to have an increasingly difficult time to maintain itself because the budget itself is going to break the society that we have. We cannot afford to have 800 or more bases outside the country, which cost a fortune to maintain. And we have a huge domestic military as well as intelligence agencies on the domestic side. I don't see an end to this problem. You can pull out of Afghanistan, so to speak, but there's going to be, like in Saigon back in 1973, when we pulled out, 75 was when it fell. Any army that we support doesn't seem to hold together after we leave, because we support it with money. Money is what corrupts. There's no sense of a fighting spirit when you spend so much money to prop up these countries, to prop up these artificial countries. And that was what South Vietnam was, and that's what, we wish well for Afghanistan, but we can't take responsibility for a country and change the nature of a society that's thousands of years old and has been fighting for God knows how long. An Afghani man is born to fight, born to die young. It's very hard to live to be an old age there. I don't see much hope for an empire in this day and age, and I think it's good if we could compete successfully, coexist with China and with Russia and with Iran. Very important. And this is a lesson that we must learn from history. Whether we learn it or not is another issue. If the American political process is so polarized that it defines success as being strong and competing against and beating these enemies, so to speak, it's ridiculous. We're going around in circles like a dog, biting our tail. In America, we have this problem of what I would call it's threat inflation. If you look at all the national security memorandum and statements back through the years, they're all the same thing. They keep talking about this threat to America. Since World War II, there was no big threat to America after World War II. Stalin and Russia were broke. They were barely able to build up their own society. They were amazingly resilient, and they did it against tremendous forces. But we have created the sense that Russia was encircling us. We've created the sense that China is about to encircle us and beat us and take away, as if China was interested in land. They're interested in economic development. I've always felt that. They're not stupid. They're not seeking to control the world, seeking to trade and become rich and successful and have a good life. We have to give up this idea that we are being threatened all the time. And if our TV industry and our movie industry and our writing and our journalists are always talking about the enemy, we're never going to get out of this hole. We have to change our thinking. Okay. First of all, I wouldn't say that. I think a lot of people have come forward with very strong statements, and they've been buried in the media. I remember Howard Hunt, who I got to know a little bit on with my Nixon movie. When he died, he was very much, he hated Kennedy, and made no bones about it. But when he died on his deathbed, his son and a friend of mine taped his interviews. He described the hatred for Kennedy in his circles, and he implied very strongly that the locus of the attack came from the Cuban community. It's well known how passionate the Cubans were to kill Castro, and when they felt Kennedy betrayed them at the Bay of Pigs, they said Kennedy must go. This was said on many lips. He was threatened. They knew about the threats against him. They're all there, but they've been classified. That's what we're trying to say. You need to declassify. You need to work at this. All those, the CIA agents around the Cuban community, David Atlee Phillips, George Joannides, who ran the DRE,
and mongoose too. I mean, that's not as important, but that was Edward Lansdale. You had people around the Cuban community, and they knew what was going on, but we haven't been able to get into those files. What was David Atlee Phillips doing in Dallas? What was Bill Harvey doing? Harvey was not supposed to be there. He came to Dallas. And what was Alan Dulles doing? He'd been fired, but he was still very much in power in his group, his old boy network. Richard Helms at the CIA was his #2 guy who was running the place. It wasn't John McCone, it was Richard Helms, who was a scoundrel. I mean, you read his book and you'll see all the lies there. These people have been caught again and again lying. But it never comes together for I guess, for people in the media. They just deal with it as a one-off. People die all the time and they say, I met a guy who came to me back in the 90s and told me the details of the plot. He had no motive to do that because he was dying of cancer. And he was dying offshore. He had to come back in the country once a year to take an exam with his superiors at the CIA. But he explained to me how that thing could have happened. He was there that day. He was there as a protection detail. Everybody was there to protect Kennedy. Everybody could walk around with a badge saying, I'm protecting Kennedy. And in that protection circle, something broke down. So it's very hard to, I mean, the actual shooters, David Morales says he shot him. There's a guy, nobody believes him, but David Morales was a heavy hitter for the CIA in assassinations. So there's always people that are here, but you can't, there's no but one person who knows the whole thing. I would say that if Alan Dulles was in charge of this thing, and coup, because he'd done coups abroad, they'd done stuff abroad, they knew how to do it. They even made a hit up to Gaulle, in France. But even if you had Dulles, I don't think he was the one who finally said go. I think he had to get approval from up top, which means that the most powerful circles in America, which go up to, you have to look at the people with the money, the biggest amount of money, whether that's the Rockefellers or people like that, and there was a lot of them back in those days. David was very powerful. You have to wonder, this is where there was a resistance at all levels in business, military, Cuba, CIA against Kennedy. Resistance, hatred, outright hatred. And he was a young guy. He had a brother right behind him. He could have been another dynasty. The motive lies there. Kill the king, and there'll be no dynasty. And then the reason I believe they got rid of Robert Kennedy was because he would have reopened that investigation. It was still young enough to get somebody. And Robert Kennedy was filled with doubts and a sense of vengeance. It's funny, when everybody talks about the day, Jackie Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Robert Kennedy, they always say they. They always say they. They never say he. Nobody. No, you have to be naive to believe one man did. Jackie Kennedy, I remember, blood on her dress. That day she didn't want to get out of the clothes. She said, let them see what they did. Let them see what they did. Robert Kennedy's first words were, he called the CIA and he said, who did it? Did you guys do it? You have to take it, you have to really accept at face value what was going on in Washington. They knew there was a civil war going on, and they knew that Kennedy did not have control of the CIA. Did not have control of it. He was worried about that throughout his 3 years. He kept referring to, we cannot say for sure that we can control the military in this country. The military hated him by the time he died. And it's very interesting to see, well, you can talk about in the 4-hour version, we point to Curtis LeMay as one of his major enemies. If you have a chance to see it and you're really interested, please do.